Deb, it's just hard to believe that we're in session 13. We're finishing chapter 7, getting into the beginning of chapter 8 in this session. And then hopefully in the next 2 sessions, we'll probably finish chapter 8 and be finished with the book. It's just been such a wonderful journey. Last session, we left them together, and Solomon had forgiven her. We went over some really biblical principles of forgiveness, and they're just so exciting to see how that he was able to forgive her. And it reminds us again of the grace of God and how he has forgiven us. And she was kind of, I think, blown away by it. And so, as we look at her response to his forgiveness, she was hoping, I'm sure, certainly that he would forgive her, but probably thought, well, he might reprimand me. And I think it was just mind-blowing to her.
She was nervous. She was.
I think she was very anxious, very nervous, as you would be in that situation. And but in verses 11 and 12, she describes his forgiveness as being rewarded with a ride in a royal chariot. And that's a wonderful metaphor to use there. The way he forgave her was so beyond her comprehension for someone who had been selfish and someone who had actually mistreated the king, that she was just blown away.
Yeah, and because of the way Solomon so lovingly responded to her attempt at reconciliation, she comes to this amazing conclusion. She says, I am my beloved's. I mean, that's a lot of security. And she could be confident that he really did love her and that he genuinely forgave her. And she was ready. She was ready to move on. She knew he was ready to move on also.
And again, it just reminds us of the beautiful picture of the forgiveness that we have in Jesus Christ. His forgiveness is so beyond our comprehension. No matter how wicked we are, no matter how much we sin against him and others, he loves us the same way he did when we got saved. And he doesn't hold our sin against us, but he receives us back to himself with a heart that celebrates, just like the prodigal father with the prodigal son, our return to him. So how else does Solomon respond to her? And in verse 13, it's interesting. He says this, Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee. And in addressing her in this verse, it's the first time that he uses a name for her, that is, calls her Shulamite. Now, that's interesting because some commentators believe that this is either her name, since it's a feminine version of his name, Solomon, or it refers to the location where she's actually from. It also could refer to the word in Hebrew, shalom, which means peace or wholeness. Or Solomon is saying, hey, you're the one who belongs to me, and you're perfect for me, and you bring me peace, and you bring me wholeness. And when he says return, return, the Hebrew word there can mean turn around, turn around, turn around. So Solomon sees her as a perfect one for him who brings him peace and wholeness. And he's asking her, will you just turn around and around and around so I can gaze at how beautiful you are? And he continues by saying this, what will we see in the Shulamite? As it were, the company of two armies. Now that's a very interesting verse and very strange verse. But according to Philip Ryken, the husband, Solomon is comparing his wife to the dancing women who celebrate military victories in ancient Israel. All attention and all eyes are given to the victory dance for the celebration. Now, they've just experienced victory over marital conflict. So his eyes are intensely focused on her, and it's not surprising he would say that.
No, so she starts dancing for her husband. It's a victory dance that's most likely pretty erotic, but it's sacred, totally biblical. But her new actions here, the dancing, communicate that she's changed her attitude. And she was using her sexuality and her femininity for the enjoyment, for the pleasure of her husband. And she's confident. And she's purposefully alluring and enticing.
And as we move into chapter 7, it's interesting to note that now the relationship is restored. It's reconciled. Right. He didn't have any inhibitions about describing her whole body. Previously, he intentionally omitted, if you remember, any references to her lips and her body below her neck because their fight had been over sexual intimacy.
I think this was pretty wise of him
Very
because
wise.
at that point he wanted to prove his desire for reconciliation and that he cared about her as a whole person. He cared about the relationship. And at that point, sex was not the issue for the reconciliation.
But now he feels liberated
Right.
since they've reconciled to speak very frankly and specifically about every aspect of his wife's beauty. And he starts in verse 7. He says, "How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O princess daughter." And from this description that follows, it really appears she has no clothes on, apart from the sandals of shoes he mentions. And the word feet is a word that normally means feet that are in motion. So as you said, she's likely dancing before him in a very erotic dance without any clothes on.
Yeah, and let me say, ladies are very vulnerable when they're naked. But the comments that Solomon makes increases his wife's confidence, and they actually cultivate romance. It's a beautifully romantic way for a husband to speak to his wife.
Now he didn't finish because he moves from her feet to, he says in the end of verse 1, "The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a cunning workman." So as he moves from her feet to describing the curvature of her thighs, he declares that her body is a work of a master craftsman. He says, "You're a divine masterpiece of God. Your beauty is so great."
And it reminds me of how when we present our marriage conference, you always explain the words from Genesis 2:22. It says, "And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman and brought her unto the man." And you explain that word "made" means to artistically build or fashion. So Solomon is actually reinforcing the truth that God artistically and fashions a woman for the pleasure of man. We, ladies, were designed by God to stimulate and ravish our husbands. And I think this is delightful that God designed the marriage bond and bodies in such a precious but a connective way. Our bodies are a gift from God.
Boy, they are. And we should never, ever forget that. He moves on up. And he says, "Thy navel is like a round goblet, which wanteth not liquor." Now, most of the time, if you were to tell your wife she has a navel like a round goblet, she probably wouldn't like that so much. But the original word for navel can be translated as navel or vagina. In fact, Ian Duquette says this is probably a discreet euphemism for the lower part of her abdomen, and comparing it to a cup of wine alludes to the intoxicating pleasures that this area of her anatomy contains for her lover. Then he moves to her belly. He says, "Thy belly is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies."
Now, hey, this sounds like a real insult, ladies, but it isn't. It isn't.
And belly here most likely refers to her womb, which in those days was preferred to be, now listen ladies, rounded instead of flat. A lot of ladies get excited about that. I have to have a flat stomach. No, in those days it was preferred to be more rounded, and it suggests the blessings also of fertility. He is indirectly saying that he is open to God's gift of children. Then he keeps moving up her body and he says, "Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins." Now, he has said this before. Nothing in his admiration for her has changed, because he said this several times before. He's just saying, "Honey, my feelings toward you haven't changed a bit."
That's right. And when he compares her breasts to twin fawns, this is another reference to fertility.
Yeah.
And the descriptions of her belly and her breasts probably suggest that her sensuality here is overlapping with the possibility of fertility. So it's like twofold here.
Yeah. Now next he moves to 5 elements of her upper body. He says, "Thy neck is like a tower of ivory." What he's saying there is she's dignified and carries herself with a confident, erect posture. And then he says, "Thine eyes are like fish pools in Heshbon by the gates of Beth Rabban." And the pools in Heshbon were where the priests purified themselves. So when he gazed into her eyes, he saw purity. He saw no uncleanness at all. And then he moves from her eyes to her nose.
My favorite part.
He says, "Thy nose is a tower of Lebanon, which looketh toward Damascus." And I often tell guys, if we go with this in a conference, Your wife probably ain't going to get turned on if you tell her she got a nose overlooking Lexington, Kentucky, you know. But this was very beautiful in the symbolism of what he's saying. Damascus was the seat of Assyria, an enemy of Israel. She looks confidently down on all dangers, is what he's saying, we believe. Solomon saw his wife as someone who was alert to things that might bring trouble to him. And as king, that was very important. She was a wife that looked out for her husband.
Yeah, and you notice too, Solomon isn't just pointing out physical features. He's including character traits that he admires, exactly why she is important to him. And she's more than a beautiful body to him. He admires her person, and he proves to her that she's valuable to him.
But he hadn't finished.
No.
He moves to her head. He says, thine head upon thee is like Carmel, and the hair of thine head like purple. Now, Mount Carmel is a majestic mountain range and is known to be one of the most beautiful places on the earth. And the point of comparison is that her head crowns her body, just as majestic Mount Carmel rests over all the landscape all around it, rising above its majestic and fertile beauty. And calling her hair purple says it's not just beautiful, but it denotes royalty. You're royally beautiful. You're the king's wife. Now he concludes with this really powerful statement. He says the king is held in the galleries. After observing her feet all the way up her body, all the way to the top of her head, he says, listen, your beauty enslaves me. The most powerful man in the world, the king, says that he is held captive, he's held in bonds, he's enslaved by the beauty of his wife.
Awesome. They just work through this rejection, loneliness, conflict.
Yeah.
But through all that, he can say the king is held captive. And this just shows that God's plan is that wives captivate their husbands or their kings with their love.
Yeah, and all the praise now transitions from praising to taking action. Now it's time for action, Solomon says. In verse 6, he says, okay, baby, how fair and how pleasant art you for, O love, for delights. And notice here again that God wants us to understand that he designed sexual intimacy between a husband and wife for delights or to be extremely pleasurable. And God isn't embarrassed about that. He says this many times. We've seen this over and over again. And Solomon continues by saying this thy stature is like a palm tree, and thy breasts are clusters of grapes. I said, I'll go up the palm tree, I'll take hold of the boughs thereof. Now the trunk of a palm tree is slender and it's very flexible. It sways gracefully in the breeze. And you can imagine that maybe as she is dancing in front of him, she's probably swaying in front of him, so it reminds him of these slender palm trees. And to look at clusters of dates makes you want to taste them. What he's saying is, I desire to kiss your breast. Also, the palm tree has separate male and female trees, which is very interesting. And since ancient times, people would take blooms from the male tree and climb up the female tree. They would tie the blooms to the branches in order to fertilize it. So to climb the palm tree means to fertilize it. He is poetically declaring that his desire is increasing. He wants to make love to his wife. So in verse 8 he says, now also thy breasts shall be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose like apples, and the roof of thy mouth like the best wine. Now he's obviously caressing her at this point. He's kissing her. And as a result, he says her kisses are better than wine, or your kisses are better than a big party or a feast.
And as she joins in this kissing with him, where it says in the roof of thy mouth like the best wine, she joins in and she says, yeah, that best wine for my beloved, that goeth down sweetly, that wine that goes down sweetly, causing the lips of those that are asleep to speak. And what it seems to be saying here is those kisses, they're for you. And the kisses, they glide smoothly over my lips and my teeth. I have to speak too. I have to declare my pleasure, not just you. I have to agree with all this. And notice, she isn't trying to stop him from talking about her body, but she encourages his pursuit.
And she's not having silent sex with him either.
No.
She's talking back to him. And notice again, the couple, they both are referring to sex as a celebration. Wine is a reference, as I said a while ago, to a feast or party, and all the scenes are involved in this great celebration of sexual intimacy in marriage. Because Solomon speaks with specific admiration, his wife begins to see herself through his eyes, and she starts to believe what he's actually saying. We see that their physical intimacy follows their verbal intimacy. And again, that's so important, especially for guys to understand. You need to praise your wife. You need to take time with your wife. Be slow with your wife. We see this example many times in the Song of Solomon where he takes his time praising her, then it moves from praise to physical intimacy.
And the conversation is explicit. It's sexual and it's stimulating.
And the song is termed, as we think of it, from a solo to a duet,
right,
where the bride comes to this conclusion. She says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me.
And to me, that shows confidence. She's confident in her ability to please him sexually. And the word desire, it's used in Genesis 4:7 of an animal prepared to devour its prey. So Solomon wants to consume this woman of delight, and she's thrilled with it.
Yeah.
She is thrilled that Solomon desires her, and she purposefully stimulates her king, and she was proud of it. She knows she holds him captive. That they belong to each other. They're not separate lives and agendas that are just living together. This is something that they are moving towards together. So ladies, celebrate your intimacy and be available, not inhibited. And you can be aggressive and bold, just like she is. Clear your mind of distractions, especially petty irritations, and then you can concentrate on the gift that God has given you. And you'll find that the passionate act of love causes you to forget conflict, because it forces you just to enjoy each other and remember how much you actually love each other. So I guess we could say physical intimacy increases confidence in your relationship. And I found this quote, and it's by Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. He wrote the book Kosher Sex.
What a title of a book.
I know. And this is what he says. The one thing that brings a marriage back on track after a fight is the raw sexual attraction that brought the couple together initially, to remind them of their love for each other. When a couple declares to kiss and make up and once again become one flesh, they are making a very important statement that essentially there's nothing fundamentally wrong with their relationship.
Wow.
So Shulamite, she doesn't stop there though. She further stimulates and entices her husband by suggesting a vacation in the country. In verse 10, she says, "Come, beloved, come, my beloved, let's go forth into the field. Let's lodge in the villages. Let's get up early to the vineyards, and let's see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear, and the pomegranates bud forth. There I will give you my loves."
Wow.
And originally she had a plan. If they ever found out that his career was interfering with their relationship, if it was causing problems, she thought, I'm not going to get upset. We're not going to get into a big conflict. What we're going to do is I'm going to make plans, and we're going to get together, and we're going to leave. And we're going to go into the country, and we're going to concentrate on each other.
In the country, out in the woods.
Right,
the countryside.
This was the original plan if they ever had conflict. Every couple needs to take regular vacations.
Absolutely.
Away from the kids, away from everyday pressures. And the buds that she's referring to, the buds of our relationship, need tender care. So ladies, I'd ask you, how do you convince your spouse to go on a vacation or a getaway? Do you nag him until you win? Are you creative and enticing? So what she does, she utilizes enticing conversation, and it's promoting this anticipation of romance. You see, intimacy can become dull when it's routine. So we need to be creative in our romance. Now notice at the end of that verse 12, she's actually enticing him by inviting him to make love outdoors. She's just described the vineyards, and she says, there will I give you my love.
No, we're not suggesting y'all do that. I mean, it's if you do, you better make sure the Boy Scouts aren't out. You know, a lot of things aren't out. But she is saying, hey, honey, let's go on a romantic getaway in the countryside and we can just make love outside.
And she continues, though. She says, the mandrakes give a smell. And at our gates are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I've laid up for thee, oh, my beloved. So mandrakes, they were thought to give forth a fragrance, encouraging the act of love. If you'll think back to like Genesis 30:14, Rachel begs for the mandrakes that Leah's son has gathered because she didn't have any children and she desperately wants children, and she figures if she gets her some mandrakes, then it's going to make her husband want her even more. But
but these mandrakes and pomegranates that are mentioned in verse 11 and 12 also once again speak of their joyful prospect of having children together. And the fruit of their love at some point will hopefully bring forth a blessing of children. They'll become fertile and have many children.
Yeah, I read that pomegranates have lots of seeds. So that's representative of bearing lots of fruit or having lots of children.
That's right. God commanded us to be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
So God, again, is emphasizing the importance of this passage is of fertility. The couple is not afraid to be fruitful and multiply. In fact, they're hoping for it.
And this should bring up a question in every young couple's mind before they're married. Is this the man that I want to be the father of my children? Is this the woman I want to be the mother of my children? But Solomon is filled with anticipation. And that's because Shulamite is using these play on words. She says, not for the old fruit. She says, for both old fruit and new fruit.
Yeah.
So she's saying, just like the fun we've had in the past, and now I've got some new plans too, new fruit. And this is maybe just a new freedom or maybe a plan to delight him in new ways. But it's healthy for a marriage to build anticipation for a planned sexual union. It's good creativity. And I read a quote by Joseph Dillow in Solomon on Sex. He said, a wise woman once said, you can become a Rembrandt in your sexual art, or you can stay at the paint-by-number stage. The woman who would never think of serving her husband the same frozen television dinner every evening sometimes serves him the same frozen sexual response every night. Sex, like supper, loses much of its flavor when it becomes predictable. It's biblical for a wife to be a skillful lover to her husband. So ladies, be creative. Don't allow your intimacy to be reduced to routine. Plan an intimate getaway occasionally and stay innovative in your expression of love. And I will give you just a little hint here. Intimacy Ignited and Intimate Issues, they're both books, offer lots of suggestions for creative lovemaking excursions or for stay-at-home surprises. Highly recommend them.
Now, the bride continues expressing her love for her husband. She says something, it seems very strange. In chapter 8, as we move to chapter 8 and verse 1, she says, oh, that you were as my brother, that sucked the breast of my mother. When I should find thee without, I would kiss thee. Yea, I should not be despised. You say, what in the world does she mean by that? She's saying she loves him so much that she wishes she could unashamedly kiss him in public like she can kiss her brother. But this type of public display of affection in that day and time would be very inappropriate. In fact, the Net Bible commentary says, the beloved expresses her desire for greater freedom to display her affection for Solomon. In ancient Near Eastern cultures, the public display of affection between a man and woman was frowned upon, sometimes even punished. For example, in Assyrian laws, the punishment for a man kissing a woman in public was to cut off his upper lip. Wow. On the other hand, public displays of affection between children and between family members were allowed. And that's kind of what she is referencing here. If you look at verse 2, she said, I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, who would instruct me. I would cause thee to drink of spice wine and the juice of my pomegranate. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. Since she can't show this public display of affection, She desires to bring him into her mother's house where she received her initial sexual instruction from her mother, and she could put into practice all the wonderful things her mother had taught her. And perhaps this is part of the instruction Paul talks about in Titus chapter 2, where the older women are instructed to teach the younger women. Learning about sex needs to take place in the home so that children won't have to learn about it in the locker room, internet, social media, or on television. They need to learn it in the home. Shulamite can communicate very openly with her husband because her mother was very open with her. So important to see and understand. For those who never received biblical instruction from parents, really these resources, the Song of Solomon, is informative and it's invaluable.
Oh, I think so. And also the wording is an alluring sexual promise that would be frequently made and kept. It's a major part of the biblical plan to keep the romance fire burning and the marriage healthy. And I love this passage too, because it proves that loving passion never gets old. It can remain fresh and inviting all the years you're married. And she concludes this stanza of the song by issuing another warning to the single young ladies.
I think this may be the third one.
I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up nor awaken my love until he please.
So God, again, as I said, I think this is the third warning, is emphasizing the delight of continual sexual intimacy and union in marriage, but he gives a strong warning to avoid premarital sex. God wants singles to understand that like all other sexual sin, sex outside of marriage leads to guilt, it leads to shame, rather than the joy and satisfaction that really can be only found inside of marriage. The world shouts that premarital sex is okay, and is even more enjoyable when you can have it whenever you want it, with whoever you want it, without any commitment. But God is shouting in these verses to singles in this song, that is a lie. Right. Don't stir up sexual love until you can follow through with it in the marriage bed as husband and wife. And once you do get married, keep stirring it up then.
That's right.
That's what we see in the song. Keep on stirring it up. You know, and as we've repeatedly pointed out, as we've gone through this journey in the Song of Solomon, the song is a shadow. It's a picture really of our relationship with God, us being the bride, Jesus Christ being the groom. And I love what Ian Duguid says. He said, we need a better husband who gives us a perfect beauty in which he then delights, an eternal husband who loves us with an intensity of passion of which human sexuality is only a pale reflection. And Jesus is that perfect husband that we all need. He really is. We must take care not to let our intimacy with Jesus Christ grow cold. Like the couple in the song, we should fan the flames of our love for him with specific praise, praising him, digging into his word, looking for aspects of his character and love that maybe we've not previously considered before, and just preaching the gospel to ourselves every day. Jesus has love that's both, we might say, old and new for us every day. His covenant for us is unchanging and dependable. His mercies are new every morning and should deepen our love for him. What a bridegroom we have in Jesus Christ. May our passion for him grow stronger and stronger every day. Now, let me just say, if you've been, again, blessed by the journey through the song, please share it with others. I hope you'll share these sessions with others that they might be blessed too. And I really haven't mentioned this before, but if you want to help and you've been blessed and you would like to donate to Family Fortress Ministries and help us with making this available and continue to make this available and other resources available, then you can do that by going to our website, familyfortress.org, and clicking on the donate button. And there you can make a donation if you'd like to, and we certainly would appreciate that. It would be a blessing to us, and I think it would help us to get the word out more in our ministry to those around the United States and around the world, and helping strengthen families. And if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and give us, if you would, a 5-star rating. I hope you'll go ahead and do that right now to help us in getting, again, the word out to more people as they see that. And don't forget to click the little bell there so you'll know about all the upcoming videos that we'll be doing on YouTube. But until next time, again, may the grace and peace and protection of our heavenly bridegroom be with you. We love you. May God bless you.